Canada just closed the tap on American corporations. Mark Carney signed the Great Lakes Protection Act into law, banning water exports from the basin without explicit federal and provincial approval. No consultation with Washington. No phase-in period. Just a complete shutdown of access that companies like Nestle, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi have taken for granted for decades. For generations, the Great Lakes operated under a gentleman's agreement. 5 massive, interconnected lakes straddling the US-Canada border. Shared management and cooperative regulations. Both countries taking what they needed with minimal restrictions. American states pulled water for cities, farms, and factories. Canadian provinces did the same. Corporations bottled millions of liters annually, selling Canadian water back to Canadians at massive markup. Nobody questioned whether unlimited extraction was sustainable because there was so much water that scarcity seemed impossible. Then climate change started dropping lake levels. Droughts hit the American Midwest harder and longer. Western states facing catastrophic water shortages started eyeing the Great Lakes as the solution. Proposals emerged to pipeline Great Lakes water to Arizona, Nevada, and California. American politicians talked about the lakes as a national resource that should serve American needs. And President of the United States, Donald Trump, threatened to simply take what he wanted, declared that water flowing through American territory belonged to America, suggested that if Canada would not cooperate, the US would extract water anyway, and dare Canada to stop them. Carney looked at the Great Lakes and saw something Washington had taken for granted. Half the basin is Canadian territory. The lakes that feed American cities and farms flow through Canadian soil. The water that American industry depends on passes through Canadian jurisdiction, and unlike oil or minerals, water is literally irreplaceable. Today, we are showing you how Canada just weaponized the most valuable freshwater system on Earth. How $890 billion in economic activity now depends on Canadian permission. And how the water that corporations assumed would always be available just became leverage that makes President of the United States, Donald Trump's threats meaningless. The Great Lakes contain 21% of the world's surface freshwater. Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario together hold 6 quadrillion gallons. That is more water than all other freshwater lakes on Earth combined outside of Lake Baikal in Russia. For centuries, that abundance meant unlimited use. Cities built along the shores knowing water would never be scarce. Agriculture expanded across the basin, irrigating crops without restrictions. Industry used Great Lakes water for manufacturing, cooling, and processing, assuming supply was infinite. Corporations extracted millions of liters, bottled it, and sold it globally. The numbers are staggering. 40 million people depend on the Great Lakes for drinking water. The basin supports $56 billion in annual agricultural production. $890 billion in total economic activity relies on consistent Great Lakes water availability. That includes manufacturing, shipping, energy production, tourism, fishing, and agriculture across 8 American states and 2 Canadian provinces. But starting around 2010, something changed. Lake levels started dropping. Superior fell to near record lows. Michigan Huron hit levels not seen in decades. Erie and Ontario showed concerning declines. Climate change was accelerating evaporation while reducing precipitation. Warmer temperatures meant less ice cover in winter, which increased evaporation. Rainfall patterns shifted, delivering less water to feed the lakes. The balance that had sustained the system for thousands of years was breaking. American states facing their own water crisis started looking north. The Colorado River was drying up. California aquifers were depleting. Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico faced catastrophic shortages. Politicians started asking why water-rich regions could not share with water-poor ones. Why should the Great Lakes hold trillions of gallons while the Southwest faced collapse? Proposals emerged to pipeline Great Lakes water westward. Engineering studies showed it was technically feasible. Political support built in water stressed states. The argument was simple. Water is a national resource, and Americans facing shortages deserve access to American water. Except the Great Lakes are not just American. They are shared with Canada. And Canada was watching its own water security deteriorate while Americans planned to drain shared resources for unilateral benefit. Canada had technically banned bulk water exports since 1999. The policy was clear. Water cannot be removed from its natural basin for commercial purposes. No tanker ships filling up on Lake Superior to sell water overseas. No massive pipelines shipping water to foreign countries. but the ban had massive loopholes. Bottled water did not count as bulk export. Small-scale removals for industrial use were permitted. And critically, the ban applied to exports outside North America, not transfers within the continent. If an American state wanted Great Lakes water, the ban did not explicitly prevent it. If Nestle wanted to extract millions of liters annually to sell as bottled water, the regulations allowed it. If Coca-Cola and Pepsi needed Canadian water for beverage production, access was guaranteed. The Great Lakes Protection Act closed every loophole. Water cannot leave the Great Lakes Basin in any form without explicit approval from both federal and provincial governments. That includes bottled water from companies like Nestle that had been extracting millions of liters annually. That includes industrial transfers. That includes beverage production for Coca-Cola and Pepsi. That includes any proposal to pipeline water to American states outside the basin. The economic impact on corporations and American states is catastrophic. American agriculture in the Great Lakes states depends on reliable water access. Manufacturing across the Midwest uses Great Lakes water for everything from steel production to food processing. Beverage companies built entire production facilities around guaranteed access to pristine Great Lakes water. Energy generation relies on lake water for cooling. Shipping through the Great Lakes moves hundreds of billions in cargo annually. All of it now operates with the understanding that Canada can shut off access if American policy threatens Canadian interests. Not immediately, not vindictively, but the legal authority exists, and Mark Carney made unmistakably clear he is willing to use it. What makes this situation strategic rather than merely economic is simple. Water is not fungible. Great Lakes water cannot be replaced, imported at scale, synthesized, or substituted. If access is restricted, industries collapse, cities face crisis, agriculture fails, and beverage production stops. Unlike oil or grain, there is no workaround. The US has no ability to secure water access through force. Canada controls critical choke points across the Great Lakes system. The St. Lawrence Seaway runs through Canadian territory before reaching the Atlantic. Lake Superior's outflows pass through Canada. Niagara Falls sits on the border with Canada, holding significant control over flow regulation. If Canada restricts access or redirects water, there is no military, economic, or political tool capable of reversing that decision. You cannot invade an ally over water. You cannot destroy infrastructure that supplies your own cities. You cannot escalate to war over lake levels. This is where Canada's leverage becomes clear. Agricultural tariffs gave Washington limited influence. Water is something else entirely. Canada controls a resource that American cities, farms, and corporations cannot function without, and unlike food or energy, it cannot be replaced or sourced elsewhere. Every major American city along the Great Lakes now operates knowing its water flows through Canadian jurisdiction. Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Buffalo. Millions of people depend on water. Canada has explicit legal authority to regulate American agriculture. Across multiple Midwest states, relies on irrigation sourced from water that originates in or flows through Canada. Manufacturing facilities, steel mills, auto plants, chemical producers, food processors, and beverage bottlers are fixed in place and built around this water access. They cannot relocate without collapsing. For years, Western states assumed Great Lakes water would eventually be available. Serious proposals existed to pipeline water to Arizona, Nevada, California, and Colorado. Engineering plans were drawn up. Political coalitions formed. Economic studies showed such projects could prevent regional collapse. All of them relied on one assumption, that Great Lakes water was ultimately accessible if the price was right. That assumption ended with Canada's export ban. Canadian law now prohibits removing water from the basin. Cost does not matter. Engineering does not matter. American need does not matter. The water stays. Western governors reacted angrily, accusing Canada of hoarding resources during a crisis and pressuring Washington to intervene. Canada's response was blunt. Canadian communities come first. American water policy failures are not Canada's responsibility. And economic pressure on Canadian sovereignty guarantees Canada will prioritize its own interests. Domestically, this position resonated. Canadian communities watched water bottled for export while infrastructure decayed. They saw foreign extraction plans advance while local protections lagged. The ban restored control over a resource Canadians assumed was protected but legally was not. The stakes are enormous. Roughly $890 billion in annual economic activity in the Great Lakes Basin depends on reliable water access. Manufacturing alone accounts for hundreds of billions. Agriculture, shipping, energy, tourism, and beverage production depend on the same assumption that water will always be available. Canada is not draining the lakes. It is not cutting off cities tomorrow. But the legal authority exists, and American industry now understands its dependence on Canadian cooperation. This is leverage that tariffs, trade wars, and threats cannot counter. As climate change accelerates, water scarcity is becoming the defining resource crisis of the century. The American Southwest is drying out, rivers no longer reach the sea, aquifers are collapsing. The Great Lakes are the last major freshwater reserve, and Canada controls the gate. President of the United States, Donald Trump, assumed agriculture was Canada's vulnerability. The export ban exposed the miscalculation. Canada controls what America cannot replace. And now every city, farm, factory, and corporation along the Great Lakes understands the reality. Their water flows through Canada on Canadian terms. The corridor is not closed, but Canada now holds the keys. And there is nothing anyone can do except hope cooperation continues.